The following is a conversation with Don McLaughlin, a former trial lawyer turned inspiring leader, wellness advocate, and the creator of the CEO Flow States framework. Don's journey involves grit, tough lessons, and profound transformation. His story is a masterclass in resilience and self-leadership, from being consumed by the relentless pursuit of success to facing significant challenges with burnout and depression. Don has lived a life of resilience and self-leadership. Today, he helps leaders, athletes, and entrepreneurs find clarity, presence, and sustainable high performance. This is Pre-Zero Sports Talk Podcast, and I'm your host, Sid Bensala. My goal is simple: to have honest conversations with real people, conversations that dig deeper than surface-level success stories and explore the human journey behind them. Today, I'm honored to sit down with Don, a man whose story is as raw as it is inspiring. So whatever you're commuting, driving, walking, or just taking a moment to relax, grab a drink, a coffee, tea, or whatever you like, and join us as we explore the power of change, the pursuit of presence, and what it means to live a life of purpose. Let's get started. Don, welcome to the show.
Sid, thank you so very much. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation and appreciate that very kind introduction.
You're welcome. I've been looking forward to this conversation because your story is one that so many people can relate to: ambition, burnout, and eventually transformation. I want to start at the point where most people avoid talking about: hitting rock bottom. You've shared before about waking up on a bathroom floor and that moment of complete self-reflection. Can you walk us through, Don, that experience?
Absolutely, Sid. It's a moment that I'm not proud of, and yet recognize how pivotal that moment was. And for me, it was the end result of just, as you highlighted in the introduction, a lifetime up to that point of pursuing more and more achievement, really. And in the midst of that pursuit of more and more, losing sight of so many things. And, most essential, my sense of purpose, my sense of self. And it was a humiliating and very humbling experience to wake up November 3rd, 2012 in the early morning hours and have this experience of being just appalled by what I'd become, and yet then very soon thereafter experiencing what I can only describe as an awakening, right? Something that I never anticipated and was shocked by. And the circumstances leading up to it are probably not necessary to get into great detail, other than to say that I was out of control, to end up waking up on the floor of a bathroom, covered in vomit, wearing the same Ralph Lauren suit that I was wearing the night before, and realized that something was terribly wrong, because at that point I was 42 years old. A accomplished lawyer, a founder of a multi-million-dollar legal technology and managed service firm, serving some of the biggest companies in the United States. And yet there I was. And I felt sort of just at my lowest, this rock bottom moment. I never felt lower. I genuinely felt as if my life had just unraveled, and I risked losing, at that point, a marriage of 12 years, 3 wonderful children under the age of 11, our family, potentially even the business, because my wife at the time was general counsel and chief financial officer of the business. And so much was at stake right there. And this awakening that I mentioned, oddly enough, Sid, and this was something that I just, again, am still dumbfounded by. It started with this acceptance of myself, and even beyond the acceptance of myself, forgiveness of myself for all the things that have led up to that moment. And that was shocking to me, that even while I felt pity and appalled by my behavior, that I also just this inspiration to forgive myself and accept myself also was the catalyst for this experience that I had over the next few hours that really changed the trajectory of my life at that point, both as a leader of a very successful, otherwise successful business that was at one time it was sliding a little bit sideways because I was sliding sideways, and I only saw that in that breaking my sort of wide open right through this humiliation of this experience that others witnessed the night before. I since learned, close friends and family. I was at my youngest brother's wedding, and so it was a very public humiliation for me and a very personal one too. And so that really is the sort of the setting for this transformative moment that led to a complete 180 for me, both in terms of my sense of purpose, my sense of self, and it led to these incredible changes in my life that I now attribute to as much a combination of grit as grace, because this awakening is not something I asked for and feel so blessed to have experienced, as painful as it was to experience. I see all the good that has come from that moment, November 3rd of 2012. And up till this day, those changes still reverberate in my life.
And how did that moment shift your perspective on success should look like?
It's a great question. Up till that point, I very much viewed success as one associated with professional accomplishment, and specific, and even beyond professional accomplishment, for me, entrepreneurial success, which was very financially driven. I, from a very young age, had this vision of success, perhaps having grown up in the 80s outside of Manhattan, that financial rewards and founding a business, that was very much my definition of success. And it drove me academically to pursue a career as a lawyer and then as an entrepreneur and a business owner. And that was very much shattered during this experience, because I realized it was all external, right? Those were all sort of external indicators of success. And what this experience of hitting rock bottom showed me was that success was about the way I was showing up and serving. And that's what I alluded to in the hours after this rock bottom moment. I reconnected with a sense of purpose that was driven by service, of bringing my best every single day as a partner, as a father, as a leader. And that became my new definition of the success in how I was showing up to deliver my best.
Yeah. Don, many people stay really stuck even after moments like that. What's the first step you took to start moving forward?
The first step for me was to, first and foremost, to take responsibility completely in my own mind.
Clear.
That there was no one else responsible other than me for the circumstance that I created that resulted in that moment. And then with my partner, my family, is to just take responsibility for how out of control I'd become. And that was very much the first step. And at the same time, along with that first step, Sid, was this, what I alluded to, this self-acceptance. That became just an ongoing practice of just accepting myself and my blind spots and the things that had led me to that moment. And I think that combination of taking complete responsibility and also accepting myself really allowed me to then make very real changes in my lifestyle, in how I was showing up as a leader. And that made all the difference in my experience of life overall, but then also in my business. And then subsequently, the real rapid growth that we experienced in the business.
Yeah.
And most importantly, for me, the level of enjoyment, fulfillment, and meaning that I experienced that I didn't prior to hitting rock bottom.
Mm-hmm. During our intro chat last year, you've spoken about being driven by the pursuit of more clients, more revenue, more success. It's something so many entrepreneurs, athletes, and leaders experience. When did you realize, Don, that more wasn't sustainable, and how did you begin to break that cycle?
I'd be foolish to say that I broke that cycle. I think this rock bottom moment really broke that cycle for
Yeah, that
me.
was the reason.
Yes, 100%. Just the combination of humiliation and humility that I experienced in that breaking wide open, because that's literally how it felt when I woke up that morning. And yet it was very conscious. I do recall that in very distinctly in the hours after that rock bottom moment of just making that decision that I'm simply not going to continue chasing more for the sake of more, because that's what the business had become for me. And I I see how it obviously led to this experience that I just that was enough. And not to say I didn't want to do well in the business. It was just with a different lens, and the lens that shifted was I will put my best back into the business and show up at my very best, and that will be enough. And
Yeah.
whether we grow 3 more million or 5 more million, that was not the focus. The focus was let me show up at my best and deliver the highest value that I can deliver, and that will be enough, as opposed to just again chasing more for the sake of more. And I
Yeah.
also knew from a business perspective that there would be a time when the business would outgrow me, I would outgrow the business. There would be a future that I wanted for the business that I might not be a part of, but I knew that if I just put my best back into it, that good would come from it. And that's exactly what happened. And it relieved so much of what I think had been carrying around, which was this press for more, and that being the sole focus rather than the service that we were delivering to our clients and the service I was rendering to my team who was delivering that. Certain respects a slight shift, but had significant changes in the
Yeah.
way I experienced the business.
Just for folks, for the listeners, some of them they might say, "Yeah, but what's the purpose of having a business if you don't scale, if you don't want more, if you don't grow, keep pushing, keep growing, do better all the time?" But can you explain, Don, based on your experience, what's the real danger of chasing more for its own sake, and how can people recognize they're caught in that cycle?
Yes, it's a great question, Sid. If the pursuit of more is simply for the pursuit of more, the real risk is that you lose sight of why you're doing what you're doing, right? And I
Hmm.
think we all know that without a why,
Hmm.
right, there's a real risk that you slide sideways, as I experienced. And so that's, I think, the distinction. When the more is an end in and of itself, and that's all there is, that's where I think you can just again lose sight of why you're doing what you're doing. And I'd question whether that's a recipe for long-term success anyway, right? Because
Hmm.
we know in any sort of relationship or economic exchange, it's the transfer of value that delivers. So if I've replaced that transfer of value with only my pursuit of more, there's a risk again that you lose sight of the value that you're delivering, and it eventually craters on itself. So I think that's the guiding light for me, is that the pursuit of more is yes, very much as an organization, as a company, that should be the goal, is to deliver more, right? To expand the reach, and yet it's the service, right? It's the value that ought to be the pursuit more of, and not
Hmm.
just revenue for its own sake, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And how do you now define enough when it comes to business, family, and success?
Boy, that's a great question, and I think it's one that I'm constantly reflecting on. And yet, I will say that I know for sure that my definition of success has also shifted in this respect. That rather than external indicators of success, it's my internal barometer, if you will, of my level of engagement and drive to deliver more value, right? And that very much is for me what I feel like is a guiding principle that continues to serve me very well. And I think that can be the case personally, athletically, in business, to have that be the guide.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk now about mental health, especially for leaders, athletes, and coaches. It's often seen as a silent struggle, something people don't like to admit, especially the male. What's your experience with that, Don, and how did you finally reach the point of asking for help?
Yeah, it's I experienced the same sort of challenge with not asking for help, with just doubling down on working harder, believing that somehow that if I stayed busy enough that I wouldn't have to succumb to the challenges of mental health. And yet that caught up with me in very real ways, tangible ways. So much so that there was a period that my level of anxiety and depression was disabling. What do I mean by that? I mean, during the course of a day, I would be just beside myself and unproductive, just not really knowing where to go next or what to do because I was just sort of overwhelmed. And it took me, again, having this rock bottom moment to know that I really did need help. I'd asked for help before, but in certain respects, I don't think I'd taken it seriously enough. And also, some of that help that I sought was necessary. And specifically, I went to see a psychiatrist. I was diagnosed as depressed. I was prescribed antidepressants. And while they helped in those darkest moments that I just described where I felt disabled, at least I was functional. But what was missing was that, to me, over time, became more of just a surface solution, right? It was more of a Band-Aid. And I think what was off was this misalignment that I spoke of earlier, that I was so driven that I'd lost sight of, again, a sense of purpose, a sense of myself. And it was only when this rock bottom moment happened that course correction really happened. And I discovered this new sense of clarity around purpose and aligning my actions with that purpose in a way that really put me on a path to have a much more balanced mental state. And then this also happened in the hours after hitting this rock bottom moment, a recognition that I needed real routines, practices, rituals to continue with this big, massive shift and awakening that I had experienced. I just knew that the way I was working before with just taking the antidepressants and coping with alcohol, and that just simply wasn't sustainable. I knew it.
Yeah.
So it was this combination of, yes, I had some support. I did ask for help, which I think is critically important. And yet there were some fundamental pieces that were missing, namely this clarity and alignment and the need for practices that are a mainstay for me, even to this day, 12 years later, 13 years later.
Yeah, yeah. What's one way we can make it easier for men, in particular, to have this kind of conversations?
I think, first of all, is to recognize that entrepreneurship and business is very hard, and not be ashamed to admit that there are very real challenges with especially rapid growth business or high stakes in the world of athletics. And just to recognize that it is very challenging and that there is support and that the support is essential to sustainable long-term success that doesn't run the risk of what I experience, which is sort of blowing up, right? So I think just acknowledging it and recognizing it and having more conversations about the ways in which we struggle that isn't susceptible to nice posts on Instagram or social media. The reality is, I think we all know that that is not the real world entirely, right? Very much we all struggle in our own ways. And I think that's very helpful for leaders, and it certainly was for me as CEO, is to recognize that in our teams, that everybody is struggling in their own ways, and what an opportunity that presents to deepen relationships and build culture is to acknowledge and recognize struggle rather than pretend that it doesn't exist and just focus on go.
Yeah, yeah. One of the most intriguing concepts you've introduced, Don, is the CEO flow state. It's not just about leadership, it's about being fully present. Can you break down this framework for us, and how did you develop it, and what are its core elements?
Sure, Sid. This CEO flow state is the result of me sort of looking back and dissecting what contributed to this significant change that I had prior to this rock bottom moment and after it. And really, three things are paramount. The first is this clarity that I've spoken of, this sense of purpose, and I became much more clear about who I was, what were my various roles as a partner, as a father, as a leader in a business. And the second is what did I want for the future of the business, but also my personal life, independent of the business in some respects, because as I mentioned to you earlier, I knew that there would be a time when the business would outgrow me, I would outgrow the business, right? So I had this, this clarity around what it is that I wanted for the future of the business and my personal life beyond it. And what did the business most need from me to realize that vision? That really contributed to that clarity that I experienced. And that clarity is really that first prerequisite in a way from my experience. I had to regain clarity first and foremost. And then the second thing that I realized is that there was so much of the way I was showing up where I just wasn't present. I was preoccupied with regrets about the past, fears about the future, constantly a stream of judgment in the midst of even interacting with my team or clients. I just wasn't fully present in the moments that matters most. And so that's really that second piece. And in that way, by regaining presence, and it's not just one thing, right? It's a cultivated practice that is ongoing. But I noticed that I was much more effective. And I heard that back from my team. And I think I was amplifying my impact as a leader. Why? Because I was fully present to really ask the questions that previously I was too preoccupied mentally to even ask those questions or deeply listen to the answers. And then the other experience I had was with clients, just being fully there for them in a way that led to the same thing, my asking better questions and listening more deeply. And in that way, amplifying my impact as a leader, and I think cultivating those qualities within my team so that I started to build more leadership within the business in ways that the team really started to grow the business. And it wasn't me running around micromanaging in a half-present state doing so. And then the last element that was so fundamental and continues to be is building a greater and greater resilience, right? I think based on this recognition that we just talked about, there are going to be challenges, right? Doesn't matter what level you are, right? You go to the next level, there's a new challenge, and many of those challenges often are more complex. They're more demanding. Yeah. And so that resilience is multifaceted from my experience. I think it's mental resilience, it's physical resilience, in many respects, it's spiritual resilience.
Hmm.
And I think it requires renewing ourselves, our most important relationships, far more conscientiously, far more proactively than I know that I did previously, right? I just went through each day and just took the demands as they came, but I wasn't engaged in practices conscientiously to renew myself and my most important relationships. And I know where it led. And those are the three guiding principles: that clarity, that presence, and resilience. And then it shows up for me in a series of practices really focused around the things that bring those three concepts to life. And there's four key pillars: mindfulness,
Hmm.
movement practice, nutrition, because of the
Hmm.
critical role it plays in energy and recovery, and then renewal, which I've spoken about a little bit. So yeah,
Repeat
that
the last one, Don.
renewal, yeah,
Renewal. Yeah.
renewal of self in a variety of different forms. That looks like
Hmm.
quality of sleep. That looks like taking walking breaks during the course of a day.
Yeah.
But then also our most important relationships, which can also and often
Hmm.
get short shrift in the press of progress, and our pursuits can often leave our most important relationships in the background in ways that I experience the real risk of losing completely. And yeah, the renewal of our most important relationships
Hmm.
is such a vital thing for, I think, leaders.
Yeah, yeah. No, you explained it perfectly, Don. And just for the listeners, what are some key habits or routines that leaders should absolutely prioritize to stay well and avoid burnout?
Yeah, it's so much the focus of my work, and these are practices that become part of a lifestyle, right? As opposed
Mm.
to some sort of artificial sort of program, if you will. Instead, just building them into one's lifestyle. And some of these practices just start right from the start of the day, and that is not jumping right into the demands of the day, and instead carving out some time, if only 15 minutes,
Mhm.
to just to gain some perspective. And one of those practices that is a mainstay for me and work with clients and in instilling is just sitting and connecting with one's breath. Breath is such a stabilizing force
Mhm.
once it becomes a practice. I think for all of us, and certainly for those that are under high stress, in those circumstances, breath becomes such a vital tool. And to start that way in the morning, even again for 10 minutes, to sit in a chair with hands resting on your thighs, and just to do some breathing with a count. That there's a variety of different approaches, but even box breathing, as it's known, inhaling for 4, holding for 4, exhaling for 4,
Mhm.
waiting for, and then 4 back in. Doing that a few times, one day is not going to obviously be this,
No.
shift,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
over time, it leads to very positive impacts on
Mhm.
our ability to manage stress, remain poised and calm in the face of great challenge, right?
Mhm.
And so that's one practice. I think the other is that I advocate is a time for some reflection of just a few moments of reading. And philosophy, I think, is such a guiding
Mhm.
force for us to look back at hundreds of years of human history and some of the great thinkers of the past. Stoicism is a school of philosophy that I think can provide so much benefit, that it only takes a few
Yeah.
minutes to
Yeah.
read a passage, reflect on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And Don, how do you convince, or let's say, how do you help leaders shift their thinking to see wellness as essential and vital, not as an option?
It's a great question, and I think that previously I would have been very skeptical of these practices and what is going to be their performance benefits. And yet there's been so much study around this concept of flow state and what are its benefits. And now there's so much evidence showing that when individuals attain this state of flow, their ability to perform just goes to the next level. And that's athletes. I think you certainly see that at the highest level in athletics, but also in business. Um, Outfits like McKinsey and other consulting firms have done studies to show that leaders who are in a state of flow, they are far more productive. Their productivity increases hundreds of percent. And so, Sid, that's my counter, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
to those that look skeptically at these practices and say, why would I do that? What's the benefit? The benefit is that it will cultivate capacity to be in a state of flow, and
Mm-hmm.
as a result you're going to be more productive, you're going to perform at higher levels, and most importantly, you're going to experience more enjoyment and fulfillment.
Yeah.
Because what do we know
Yeah.
from people that experience flow? Time passes without their recognition. They're not worried about the results. They're fully engaged in a way that there's just a level of joy with the
Mm.
activity itself. And I think that's equally as applicable in the business arena.
Yeah. You've led teams as large as 70 plus people, and you've talked about authentic leadership. What's your definition, Don, of authentic leadership, and how has it evolved for you?
It's a great question, Sid. My definition of authentic leadership is that leading in an authentic way recognizes that it's like we talked about a few minutes ago,
Mm.
that struggle is right there with the pursuit of success, and to recognize first and foremost that the struggle is real, and not to ignore it, and give teams space to just acknowledge the ways in which they're challenged in their work, for example. And that also ties right in with listening, right? I think we all know the power of listening, but it's another thing entirely to have team meetings in which team is they're able to voice and express challenging topics and talk through them. That to me is a hallmark of authentic leadership, and a culture that is built around authentic leadership. And in those cultures, I think they're the ones that they end up being those businesses that are very successful.
Mm.
Why? Because they've again provided the space for employees and the team as a whole to bring their whole self to the job, and contribute in a way that they know the culture supports, rather than being stifled
Mhm.
or suppressed.
Yeah.
And that to me is the difference maker.
Mm. And on that, Don, what's the one thing every leader should do to create a culture of authenticity and trust, mainly which is hard to achieve quite often?
Yes, very hard to achieve trust. I think it takes courage from the leader. And what I mean specifically, the courage to ask questions and listen to answers that may be uncomfortable to hear. That's, I think, the courage that's needed for leaders, is to be willing to, again, ask difficult questions and hear difficult answers. And there's another significant dimension to this that I experienced and continue to. And now it's become a bit of a catchphrase, to be vulnerable. But I can just say, in my own experience, my being vulnerable with my team, it surprised me at how that vulnerability led to an enhanced cohesion, collaboration, camaraderie, that I was just completely surprised by how beneficial it was for me to be vulnerable about
Mm.
areas that I was struggling with, that I think is very challenging for leaders. It certainly was for me, that I only welcomed that vulnerability after this rock bottom moment because, again, my entire orientation to leadership had shifted. And that vulnerability, I think, is very powerful because it also invites the team to then be vulnerable themselves. And in that way, a willingness to acknowledge the shared struggle that we all have in our own unique ways.
Mm, mm. You've mentioned that one of the biggest shifts for you, Don, was learning to forgive yourself. That's not an easy thing to do, Don. What led you to that recognition, and how has self forgiveness played a role in your leadership and personal growth?
Yeah, perhaps one of the hardest things, that forgiveness, when as a driven type A person, I found it very difficult prior to this rock bottom moment to fully forgive myself and accept myself. And I think again it was just this the pain of that humiliation and breaking wide open that created this opening to forgive myself. How that happened, I don't know. I had read a book about 6 months before this rock bottom moment that grew wildly popular with the title "Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It," and that book written by Kamal Ravikant. Kamal also a entrepreneur and founder, and he wrote this short book about an experience that he had and this practice that he had of repeating a mantra to himself that instilled this self-acceptance and forgiveness and self-love. And yet for me, it just came out of nowhere, right? It's not like I consciously thought about, oh, I need to practice this forgiveness and self-acceptance. It just came over me, right? Perhaps because I had nothing else. I just felt like at the end of my rope, literally. And yet I think that self-love, and we see it so much in popular culture now, how important it is, self-love, which I agree with. And yet when it's an end to self, that's not what I experienced. I experienced this forgiveness and acceptance that immediately catalyzed into, how do I serve? How do I serve better than I've served before? How do I show up better than I am? So it shifted from just this self-acceptance into action, right? How am I showing up? And how do I up-level how I'm showing up in a really genuine, authentic way, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Your concept of clarity and presence goes beyond business. It's like a life philosophy. How do you personally stay present amid the chaos of life and work?
Goes back to those practices that we spoke about that for me are, as I say, a mainstay. It's a daily effort and one that is a non-negotiable for me to engage in these practices that do this central thing. Allow me to slow down so that in certain respects I can speed up in other areas. But it's just again a necessity, a non-negotiable for me because I know my tendency, right? I had 42 years of experience up to this rock bottom moment to know that left to my own devices, without these practices, I'll run myself off the rails, so to speak.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Don, if you had to define success on your own terms without society's definitions, what would it look like today?
Yeah, it's another great question. And I think leaving aside society's definition of success, for me, it's about living my life in service to the work that I feel most called to bring forth. And that's not an easy endeavor from my experience. Why? Because just like everyone else, I was socialized and conditioned and still am by so many external inputs and definitions of success sold by advertising and in so much of the external world. Mm-hmm. And yet I have learned where that leads, right? In both my own rock bottom moment, but then achieving the highest levels of success with a very successful exit, and realizing that those only go so far, and in many respects, at least for me, are dead ends to a sense of lasting fulfillment and deeper meaning. And so for me, it's again, to get back to these practices, to return to myself and what I feel called to bring forth in the way of work and service, because that to me, through all this experience, that service is really the source of the contentment, the fulfillment, the meaning that I thought all this external success would bring.
Yeah, yeah. And how can listeners start the process of redefining success for themselves?
I think
Because
it's
just to add, Don, just to be a little bit clear with the listeners, quite often when we say success, it's more, you know, graduate, have a diploma, find a job, make money, start a business, maybe start a family. And for the majority, generally, this is how we define success.
Yes,
Yeah.
agreed, as I did, and often feel the pressure to find life success in that way. In my experience, this slowing down is so important, and taking opportunity to experience, as basic and as simple as it sounds, stillness, to step away from all of the outside world. And so what does that look like practically? As I coach my clients, during the course of a day, taking a walk for just 15 minutes and
Take a break.
leave aside all the external input and connect with the most basic elements of nature as a way to experience that stillness. And done consistently over time, that has been the most productive way for me to remember what matters most, and redefine success from that externally driven definition to one that's very much driven internally. And that can be in the midst of work that maybe you don't feel completely aligned with, as I did with that business. And yet it was only through, again, redefining success and regaining my sense of self and purpose. And that can happen, I think, even in the midst of a job that maybe you don't love, right? You don't see it as your end all be all calling, but to engage in that practice and rediscover a sense of self, I'll say that you'll show up far more effective and likely to lead to bigger and better things if you regain that sense of self and cultivate that on a regular basis.
Great. Don, now it's time for our lightning round. It's quite popular. It's the fun stuff. So ready for speedy Q&A?
I love it.
What's one book that changed your life?
I've mentioned the one, and I'll
Yes, you did.
restate
Yeah.
that. Love yourself like your life depends on it. The other that really had such a profound impact on me, Finding Ultra, written by an author, an American author, Rich Roll, who happens to also be a lawyer like me, a former lawyer. And what I found in Finding Ultra is a path through athletics. And in particular, for me, it translated into long distance trail running in the mountains that really changed my life in my mid 40s, and opened up a world that being out in nature and wilderness for hours on end really was such a gift to me.
Great, great. If you could have a dinner with a historical figure, who would it be and why?
Oh, what a great question. For me, the first that came to mind the minute you asked the question, Sid, Mahatma Gandhi. I just find this simple approach to life that he lived that had such profound impacts on an entire country. Yeah, I would love to just listen to Gandhi. So that's yeah, what a gift that would be.
Great. What's one daily habit that keeps you grounded?
An active practice of mindfulness, and that includes sort of formal meditation for 20 minutes a day, but then also catching myself walking more mindfully. So mindfulness is that practice.
Good. Don, if you could give one piece of advice to your younger self, what will it be?
The one piece of advice I would give to my younger self is to give more weight to my own inner sense
Hmm.
than I do to the directives from others. Is to really give more weight and credence to my own inner voice, if you will. That would be the one piece of advice I'd give to my younger self.
Hmm. Coffee or tea?
Nowadays, tea, although I love coffee, I'm a big proponent of green tea at the moment.
Excellent. Favorite trail to run?
There's a trail outside of my hometown here, Steamboat Springs in northwest Colorado, called the Red Dirt Trail. And
Hmm.
that is a favorite for the way in which it climbs above these beautiful mountain meadows that I just so love, and stands of aspen trees that
Hmm.
turn this golden yellow orange in the fall. That is such a gift to go up the Red Dirt Trail.
Any particular season?
Yes, June. Why June?
June.
Because in the Rocky Mountains here in Colorado, June is when the mountains, having been covered in so much snow for so long, June is the point at which everything is coming alive. So much
Wow.
so that trails that you haven't been on or haven't been traversed that frequently, they start to
Hmm.
grow over themselves because everything is shooting up. And
Yeah.
so it's just the new life that comes in the mountains in June, so much so that what I run through on a Saturday, the
Hmm.
following Friday looks very much different. So that's a
Okay.
real gift.
And how about fall in autumn?
Fall is boy, it's like opening a birthday gift every day, and yet it's a reminder too of the need to enjoy it while it's there, right? Because we can have one storm in the Rockies
Hmm.
that brings hail and snow and all those beautiful yellow aspen trees in one night. So many of them can just be swept away. And so
Yeah.
getting out there and really enjoying it on those glorious days that we have in September in the Rockies is it's so very beautiful.
Wow. Fantastic. If you could instantly learn a new skill, what would it be?
Speak any language.
Hmm. Fully agree with you.
Yes.
How do you unplug at the end of a tough day?
For me, it's movement. It's getting out there. Most often for me, it's running out in the mountain, if only for 30 minutes, 45
Hmm.
minutes. I just said that question, how after a tough day to reset. There's something about just moving the body, and it could be a rapid hike, a jog. It doesn't, it's not about the intensity or the duration. It's just
Hmm.
about getting that movement and getting the blood flowing, the lungs pumping. That just there's many times they'll go do that, and at the start of it, I wonder, why am I've got so much else to do. This is such an inconvenience, and yet I know 30 minutes later I'm gonna have a shift in my perspective, and I'm gonna feel different, just physiologically, mentally. And so that is the number one way that I unwind at the end of the day, is get out there, get outside, even if it's inclement weather.
Hmm.
Sometimes that's even better because it sort of shakes me up in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. What's one song on your power playlist
Song on my power playlist.
or a type of music?
Yeah. There's one song in particular, and now there's sort of two versions of it, although different songs. "Beautiful Day" by U2 is one that I really
Hmm.
love that song. And there's an American artist now who has a similarly titled song, "It's a Beautiful Day." And I love that song as well. Just a reminder in the midst of all the challenges that it is a beautiful day to
Yeah.
to be alive. What a gift it is.
Hmm. Hmm. What's one failure later become a great success?
This is a hard one for me to admit because I was born and raised in a traditional Irish Catholic family, and one failure for me is my divorce. Yeah. One never goes into marriage expecting or anticipating that marriage ending, but that is the reality for me. And yet I just returned from a week on the Pacific coast in Mexico with my 3 now nearly fully grown children and their mom. And while we've been separated and divorced now nearly 10 years, a failure, because it certainly is. I'm just on my mother's side, I'm one of 22 first cousins, and I'm the only one that's divorced. And so very much a failure in that respect, but a great success in that. And I credit so much to Lauren, the wife of my children, my ex-wife, for both of us committing to go into counseling and let go of those things in the interest of supporting, fostering our children to grow into themselves and do so in a way that can be celebrated by both of us, even though we're no longer in a marriage.
What's a movie, show, or documentary that had a big impact on you?
Yeah, in just the last few years, this documentary called Game Changers, which is about the Olympic level and professional level high performance athletes that are on that consume a plant-based diet. That was very eye-opening for me, and it certainly has informed my approach to nutrition. Not to say that I'm vegetarian or vegan. I've been from time to time both vegetarian, vegan, pescatarian, but just the movie, just in the way in which a plant-based diet can provide so much of our nutritional needs that I think so many of us think is not possible. And so that's the one that really sticks with me and jumps right out, Sid.
Yeah, yeah. What's a hobby or interest you have that might surprise people?
Motorcycles. Motorcycles is perhaps given by my ultra endurance trail running and athletics in that respect. There's just something about motorcycles that at a young age really captured my attention. And now at the age of 55, it's as great as it's been. And just the experience of moving on 2 wheels and experiencing a time and a place, and it just brings me alive in a way that few other things do.
Yeah, yeah. It's a virus and there is no antidote for it.
That's right. That's right.
And lastly, Don, a piece of advice or a wisdom to our listeners on any topic.
What an invitation. The wisdom that I love to share here in concluding is how important it is to reconnect with ourselves and step away from the noise, if you will, that we're all bombarded with day in and day out, and just reconnect with ourselves and what that can foster in the way of an appreciation for self, that we show up as a better version of ourselves, I think, when we reconnect with ourselves, and also develop a level of compassion, both for ourselves, but then for everyone else, that we're all in this together. We all face our own struggles, and I think the more we can reconnect with ourselves and, again, cultivate the compassion for ourselves, the more we can do so with others.
Yeah. Don McLaughlin, thank you so much for being so open and authentic with us today.
Oh, Sid, it's been all my pleasure. I so appreciate the invitation, the conversation, and it's just been such a delight.
And before we wrap up, Don, can you tell our listeners where they can contact you, learn more about your work, or connect with you online?
Probably the best place on social media, it's Don McLaughlin Jr. So that's Don McLaughlin, McLaughlin, Jr. on social media. And then a great resource online is just my website, which is thedreamexit.com. Again, thedreamexit.com.
To our listeners, if today's conversation sparked something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, rate, and review the show. It's how we continue to bring you stories like this. I leave you with a few words from Viktor Frankl, an Austrian neurologist and psychologist best known for his work Man's Search for Meaning. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. I'm Sid Ben Salah, and this is Pre-Zero Sports Talk podcast. Stay well, stay inspired, and we'll see you next time on the show. Bye-bye.